Hi, welcome to this week's video. This week's video is about poetic devices in poetry, part 1. So in this week we're going to look at how different figurative language and different other sort of poetic techniques can improve and enhance our understanding of a poem. So this week we're going to look at personification, hyperbole, assonance, oxymorons, and alliteration. So hopefully after today's lesson we'll be able to have a bit of a more of an understanding of not only what these different techniques are, but how they can improve our understanding of poetry and help us to write poetry as well for other people to give them a better idea about what we're saying. So firstly, we'll look at personification. Now, personification gives human characteristics to inanimate objects or animals. This can really affect the way the reader imagines things. So, I'm going to give you some examples of certain lines that would be in poems or things that the first line doesn't use personification and then the second line does use personification, and see if we think that it can create better imagery for that sentence. Okay, so example, the sun was bright this morning. Now it's a decent sentence. It explains what's happening. Although if we use personification in that sentence, we can say, the sun greeted me this morning. A bit of a better way to sort of explain, obviously we're giving the sun a human quality about greeting someone. The sun doesn't really greet people, but giving that creates a better image in our mind about what was happening and just generally what's going on. All right, the second one. There were lots of stars in the sky. Now we use the one with personification. That should be the sky. Let me just write it in there. Okay. The sky was full of dancing stars. Now, the personification here is dancing stars because obviously stars can't dance. But this idea about what's happening in the sky gives us a better image in our head of what's going on. All right, let's use another one. The teapot made a loud sound as it boiled. Yeah, it's a pretty boring sentence. The teapot sang as the water boiled. See the idea about the teapot singing? Just that personify as a human tendency really just gives us a better idea, and it's just a nicer, more interesting way of saying that. The wind made the leaves fly across the ground. Once again, just telling us what's happening. All right. The leaves on the ground danced in the wind. Using that figurative language technique of personification in the idea about the leaves dancing really gives us a better idea of actually what's happening to the leaves instead of them just flying across the ground, which in our head we just see this idea of just maybe some leaves rustling. The idea about the leaves dancing gives us this image of these leaves sort of dancing around and swirling up in the air and around, gives us a better idea. So in this way, you can see that personification really does help us to create better images in our head. That doesn't mean you have to use personification for all of it, but maybe when you're writing a poem, or when you're reading a poem, and you identify that the use of personification in that poem has helped you create a better image in your head. These are the sort of responses that I want to see. So when I give you a poem and you're looking for figurative language devices, and you're reading the poem and you're trying to get a better image in your head, you can explain not only why you had that image, but why the author's use of that figurative language technique has helped your idea of that poem. All right, let's move on. Okay, the next technique that we're going to talk about is hyperbole. Now, hyperbole is the idea about exaggerating in poems. And exaggerating is really important in poetry because it can be used to emphasize or add to the point that you're trying to make. So really, if you haven't looked at some of the examples we're using today, hyperbole is really important. And that doesn't mean you always have to use it, but if you're trying to really explain a point about how cold something is, or how hot something is, or how hungry you are, or how rich someone was, the idea about sort of exaggerating that point is a better idea of creating an idea in your head about how that character might be feeling, or just generally the point in general. All right, without hyperbole, he snored extremely loud. Decent, it's got adjectives in there. It's not a bad sentence. But with hyperbole, he snored louder than a freight train. All right, you are comparing it, so it's almost like a simile as well. But the idea, obviously he's not snoring louder than a freight train, but by giving you that example, you really get a better idea about how loud this person actually is snoring. Once again, without hyperbole, I am so hungry. With hyperbole, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Comparing, explaining how hungry that person is just giving you a better idea, that emphasis on that point about how hungry they are. Without hyperbole, he's so skinny. With hyperbole, he's as skinny as a toothpick. Now, not only is this hyperbole, but it's also a simile. And a lot of similes are hyperbole because they are really giving you an exaggeration. However, they aren't all like, it was as red as roses is a simile, but it's not an exaggeration. But yes, hyperbole gives you a better. It is used by an author to emphasize their point. So if you're writing a poem or reading a poem and you're trying to emphasize a point, then that would be a technique that you could use, hyperbole. But this is, once again, like personification. When you're reading a poem and you're looking for, you're trying to understand a poem, that could be something you pull out and you say, in the fourth line, the author has used hyperbole to emphasize their point about how hot the weather is. These are the sort of responses that I need you to start making when you're trying to read and comprehend poetry. All right, let's move on. Alliteration. Okay, well, I'm not going to spend too long on alliteration because really we already get this one. Alliteration is the repetition of initial sounds in two or more words. Now, alliteration can be helped to convey imagery and stress timing. It helps make a line more memorable and gives effect to that the poet intended. So it might be happy or sad or loud or evil, and it tries to make it more memorable. We can have some more sort of funny examples of alliteration in poetry, and there can be some more serious ones. But a few of the ones we found were three grey geese in a green field grazing. Grey were the geese and green was the grazing. Or the sea swept up the slippery seaweed. The idea of having at least two words in a sentence that can have the same initial sound is an example of alliteration. Okay. Once again, like the ones we talked in class about Betty bought a bit of butter, or she sells seashells, or Peter Pepper, whatever that one is. Or how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if woodchuck could chuck wood. All those are examples of alliteration as well. All right, let's move on. All right, here's one that we probably haven't looked at that much so far, and that's the idea of assonance. Now, assonance is not the repetition of the initial sounds, it's the repetition of the vowel sounds in nearby words. So it could be the EA sound or the double O sound, and it's usually used to reinforce the meanings of words or to set the mood. For example, I must confess that in my quest I felt depressed and restless. Now, they don't all rhyme, quest and confess and depressed and restless. However, the S in confess, quest, depressed, restless gives that in the vowel sounds is repeated, which does give you this idea about the mood as well. And he held the sleeping geese by the feet. The idea of sleeping and geese and feet, that repetition of that double E sound is an example of assonance. Okay, I hope that helps. Let's move on to the next one, the last one we're doing today, which is oxymorons. Oxymorons are really, really fun to use, and they're usually two contradictory things or opposite terms that are placed alongside each other. For example, it could be something like awfully good, or deafening silence, or pretty ugly. That's an interesting one. Run slowly. Now, all these, like awfully means bad. Good obviously means good. Deafening, so it's like really, really loud. Silence, so you can't really have loud silence. Although it really does, deafening silence does give you an example of how actually it was so quiet that it was like it was almost deafening because it was just awkwardly silent. Pretty ugly, that emphasizes how ugly something is. Run slowly. Dull roar. Plastic glasses, you can't have if they're glasses, how can they be plastic? So those two things contradict each other. Or it was terribly awful isn't one, because terribly awful is both the same. So just don't worry about that one. It could be something like amazingly awful. Example in poetry: living to die with a cruel kindness, I screamed in silence at the face of the nice villain. Okay, with a cruel kindness, you can't really have cruel kindness. Or screamed in silence. How can you scream in silence? So these are examples of oxymorons in poetry. Yep. So, summary of this week's lesson is, this week we looked at the personification, onomatopoeia, assonance, alliteration, and oxymorons, and how they can help improve the meaning and imagery of a poem. So, once again, when we're reading and trying to understand and comprehend poetry in class, I want you to be able to not only identify features, because just because you can say, oh, in the third line there's a use of simile, that's not is going as far as I need you to go. I need you to explain to me where that figurative language has been used, and also how it has helped, how the author has used it to help enhance the meaning of the poem. Alright, so that's this week's thing. I thought I would leave it by popular demand by some of our students. I've decided to leave you with a short video at the end, which is by a website called Flocabulary, and this one's about figurative language. Now, we haven't talked about metaphors or similes this week, and we might get to that next week, although I think you've done a lot of stuff on metaphors and similes, so we might not. However, this video goes for about 2 or 3 minutes. It's a bit weird, but I hope that it does help you learn something about it. Anyway, here it is.
Meet Will, a youngin' with an old soul, an MC who wants to be the next to blow. Imagine he's in a dark room in Manhattan, scrapping, scribbling on napkins, trying to make a living off rapping, but skills he lacked them. Nobody thought that it would happen until one day Will switches his style, gets deep in his wordplay, gets witty and wild. He used to sound so embarrassing, now peep all the metaphors and comparisons. His life is a highway, but he confessed he has a plan but needs a GPS. He's using references and illusions, a lyrical Houdini, creating illusions. Dolphins in 72, he won't lose. Up by the first alarm, he's not snoozing. You'll be amazed by every phrase. He will come correct with the wordplay, literal lines that block his way. He will come correct with the wordplay. You'll be amazed by every phrase. He will come correct with the wordplay, literal lines that block his way. He will come correct with the wordplay. Comparing with like or as, he's dropping similes, taking little steps like a centipede. He's sharp like a laser, sharp as a razor. In the night as dark as Darth Vader, Duke and Juke and adjust his position, contrasting two things in juxtaposition. From weak to made, cheap to paid, a creep to a dude who leads the way. Using personification, what's he doing? Making objects and animals seem human. The moon smiles as the city breathes. He can feel the heartbeat of the city streets. A live show, you really ought to see it. Will drop some onomatopoeia, words that sound like what they describe. Now the crowd's buzzing, it's alive. You'll be amazed by every phrase. He will come correct with the wordplay, literal lines that block his way. He will come correct with the wordplay. You'll be amazed by every phrase. He will come correct with the wordplay, literal lines that block his way. He will come correct with the wordplay. Will he exaggerate? Use hyperbole? He's the best ever at it, so certainly with assonance, vowel sounds he's repeating. He seems the least beat in any season. His fans are legion. All the boneheads who bring beef leave with lots of lyrical lesions. That's alliteration. Same sound sentence. It's common sense. He's calm with the confidence. Using irony, opposite meaning. His lines hit as soft as iron. Believe him. Good with the puns and the wordplay. Oh my, going deep in double meanings like they were a coal mine. Will skills are sick like ERs. You heard of this? Get hit and you'll see stars like Copernicus. If you only have one chance to shine, you better get up, get out, and go wild.
Alright, so I hope that video helped you in some way. Other than that, I hope you have enjoyed the video, and please read the question down below about what you're supposed to do for the comment section. Thank you.